Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Long-haul truckers. What's the creepiest / most paranormal thing you've seen on the road at night? Episode 2. I was headed west on I-76 here in Denver, just cruising along at about 70 miles per hour. Out of nowhere, I saw a massive, almost solid cloud of what looked to be dirt coming at me. I'd say it was at least 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall. I scanned ahead of me but couldn't see any vehicle it could have come from. With nowhere to go, I slowed down and took the hit, hoping there wasn't anything big enough in there to come through the windshield or jack up my truck owner/operator. It was pretty loud as I smashed through it. The instant it hit, I knew it wasn't dirty though. I immediately hit the washers because I couldn't see a weird thing through all of the carnage. My windshield was painted with guts. Turns out it was bees, freaking huge bees that sounded like rocks when they hit. I can't even imagine seeing that swarm if I were walking. They would kill anything in their path. I picked up a hitchhiker in my small Nissan Versa sedan, and we were driving down the freeway. There was a big vehicle in front of me, so I couldn't see what was in front of that when all of a sudden the other guy started yelling, "Tire, tire," and pointing ahead of us. I slammed on my brakes just in time to see the SUV in front of us swerve too late as the car in front of it swerved as this massive tire that was rolling down the freeway demolished the front end of the vehicle in front of me and bounded high into the air, coming down in front of my car where the steel band broke and it stopped rolling. If I hadn't slammed on the brakes, it probably would have come down on top of me. He got out at the next gas station. I don't remember his name, but I think he saved my life that day. My dad has several stories from hauling logs in Idaho and driving trucks through Utah and Nevada. My favorite is actually just in his pickup going through Utah. He said there was a light keeping pace with him out in the desert on a moonless night. It kept pace for a minute before it disappeared, and his truck turned off. He stopped and turned it on and pulled it off at the next dinner. The folks in the diner called it a common occurrence. The creepiest is when he was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down from near Coeur d'Alene area during a snowy winter night. He was putting on chains before heading down steep grade and said all of the hair stood up on his body. It felt like there was something watching him. Halfway down the switchbacks he saw a large figure standing on a 20-foot tall embankment. As he got closer it jumped down and the shoulders were as tall as the cab. In a single bound it leaped down and then leaped over to the other side of the embankment. At the time he thought it was a Sasquatch, now he says it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He didn't stop to remove the chains until he was far away from the mountain. Alright, that second story is really weird. I went to a boarding school that was in the woods in Idaho, in Bonners Ferry, which was about an hour or more from Coeur d'Alene. In one of the dorms, there was this 8-foot shadowy figure that would just stare at you sleeping from across the room. The ceilings weren't that high, and there was a hunch to it, like the giant in Big Fish. I was there for 2 years. I saw it about a year in, but new kids on their first night saw it. Everyone knew, and if you got transferred to that dorm then you were warned. In a joke, we were kids. It's been 15 or so years, and I still just got goosebumps writing that out. Of course, the story going around that it was just a really tall staff member named Jeff that committed suicide, and he was just making sure you were asleep, so that was its name, Jeff. There's something out there. I would tell more stories, but it's like telling someone you saw a UFO. You might believe them somewhat, but there's always that, "sure you did," to it. This is a really crazy coincidence though on my end hearing something like that. I'm a stand-up comic. I often refer to my profession as being a trucker with jokes. Near the north end of mainland Michigan, I saw a car stopped on the side of the highway. We hadn't seen a car for a while. It was 2 a.m. I commented to my friend, "Poor bastard." But as we passed the car, the lights came on and it got back on the road. Odd timing. And then, it was gaining on us. I told my friend to speed, he did. He sped more and the car kept closing in. We were doing 120 and this guy was catching up to us. We saw an exit with a hotel, so we took it and drove right in front of the building, where it was well lit, and we could see the front desk clerk. The car got off that exit too. It drove into the hotel parking lot. Then I turned around and got back on the highway. I'll never know what that guy wanted from us. I'm fine with that remaining a mystery. Driving I-30 through Texas and Arkansas, I would see what looked like animals/faces popping out of the bushes, but longer than a glance proved nothing there. They had just paved the highway, and there was hardly any traffic. I was dead tired, it was super dark. Highway hypnosis, I suppose. Paranormal. When I went to local driving, my route ran near an Air Reserve base in Indiana, so you'd see planes and helicopters pretty often. One night, at about 2 a.m., I was headed to pick up another load when I saw a bright green light in the corner of my windshield. It was too low to be an aircraft. It moved pretty slowly, then darted, and I lost sight of it behind some trees I drove by. Typical, I saw an UFO, but I still think it was just a helicopter or a jet that I saw at the perfect angle that turned after a takeoff. The jet pilots have broken the sound barrier over town a couple times in the past, sonic boom, so jet flying abnormally isn't necessarily out of the realm of possibility. Simply crazy. Driving south on the I-75 in the winter in Ohio, I witnessed a compact car like a Cobalt or similar get on the on-ramp to merge into the I-75 north and lose control. They went sideways, fell at least 6 feet off the ramp and onto the shoulder of the interstate, landing on all four wheels, spun 360 degrees, and then proceeded to merge into traffic like it was nothing. Blew my mind. The CB radio was going nuts for about 5 minutes. Holy shit, who else just saw that, etc. My grandfather was in the Air Force, and one night he was driving, back to his base maybe? I can't quite remember, and he saw a woman standing on the side of the road in a long white dress at about 2 a.m. He circled back to ask if she needed help, and she was nowhere to be seen. He searched for her for about and before giving up and deciding to leave it alone. When he decided to go on his way, he had a strong feeling that he needed to switch lanes. He was on the road alone in the middle of the night, so he had no idea why, and just ahead on the road there was a broken down truck with no hazards on that he would have hit, and probably been killed by, if he stayed in the lane he had been in. To this day he's convinced the woman was trying to warn him, like an omen or something. I was 23, my newly married husband and I decided driving a team would be a fun adventure after college, rather than jumping into the 9-to-5. I was down in Arizona, on a long stretch of nothing about 4 a.m. when a guy pulled up next to me waving his CB. I never left mine on, listening to those guys' BS was irritating. I turned on my CB and he told me I had a blown tire. I thanked him, figuring I would stop at the next truck stop. He kept harassing me to pull over and check my tire for a good 40 miles. I finally got to the next town and the pilot truck stopped, got out and checked my truck. No blown tires anywhere. No clue what that guy would have done to me, but I'm so glad I trusted my gut and didn't stop. Not paranormal, but I have plenty of stories as a young woman on the road. I'm a truck driver in the UK. I was driving through rural Scotland one night going down a country lane. All of a sudden I started to see flashing lights come through the trees. Lights of all colors flash through the trees and cause some really freaky looking shadows on the road. I'm not a believer of aliens or anything, but my first thought was UFOs. Safe to say I put my foot down and got out of there. Found out the next day it was rave happening in a field. But at the time it didn't scare me. A friend of mine was staffing at a LARP. The LARP was held at a camp they rented out for the weekend. She and a bunch of other people had donned robes playing necromancers or cultists or something. Well, apparently a truckload of beard-up teenagers had decided to visit the camp to party it up in the woods. They were barreling down the dirt road when they came upon the group of robed cultists. They slammed on the brakes, and my friend hears people screaming from the cab, "Holy shit! Get out of here! Go go go!" The truck tore out of there faster than they came in. I always wondered what those people thought was going on and if I'll ever see their post in one of these threads. Two friends and I had to drive from Laredo, Texas to Baton Rouge, Louisiana one night in my Ford van. It was about 2 a.m. There is a particularly long and dark section of highway just outside Laredo, no buildings, towns, or lights for about 50 miles. I was in the right lane coming up on a truck and pulled out into the left passing lane. As I was slowly overtaking this long truck, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement of this big truck towards the right shoulder. I saw the truck was swerving to avoid hitting a person dressed in an all-white, white face, whose arms were folded across the chest and eyes were closed as they walked across the highway. I swerved to the left and barely missed this ghostly-looking person with my passenger mirror, can still remember seeing that the eyes were closed. That's how close we came to hitting this person. Not a trucker, but I've driven across the country a few times. Have two freaky things that have happened. First, middle of the night with a friend and we pulled off to the side of the highway to take a break and switch drivers. Nobody else around on the road. I walk to the side, pitch black, whip it out and start to pee. My friend is just stretching his back or whatever. I heard something in the woods shaking a tree. No other way to describe it, a tree about 30 feet away shook. Then I hear something big crashing through the woods coming straight for us and the car. My friend and I don't even say anything, he dives in the driver's side, and I jump through the passenger window, pants still down. He floors it out of there, legs and pants dangling outside. Never did see anything in the rear-view mirror, but there was something out there coming at us. My friend likes to say he heard me stop peeing when that tree shook. Second, I was solo somewhere in West Virginia, again in the middle of the night. I got off an exit, one of those long curvy ones. I saw lights before I got off and assumed it was exciting stuff, or maybe even construction. Get to the exit and it's not construction, it's a ton of Army or National Guard guys. The exit was lit up brighter than daytime, so many lights set up pointing everywhere. The Army guys were completely decked out, gas masks on and assault rifles. They were sprinting around. One guy at the corner was frantically waving me through to get back on the highway. I gunned it out of there. I looked in the news later and didn't see anything, no idea what was going on that night. My mom, sister, and I were on our way to a baseball game of mine during my junior year of high school. This was in northern New York, so spring got a little chilly at times. The main road we took stretched about 35 miles and was nothing but cornfields and tree lines. We hit a stretch of the road that was super foggy for no reason, so my mom slowed down to a proper speed. We finally reached the end of the fog, and we all looked to the left to see where we were. About 50 yards from the road was people in what appeared to be wedding clothing from at least 100 years ago, man wearing a big top hat and the woman wearing an incredibly old-looking white dress, holding hands with their backs to us walking towards the wood line. We drove past and I just remember the silence in the car until my mom said, "What was that?" Till this day whenever we are together and one of us tells the story we all get goosebumps. Not a trucker, but I was driving through Nevada on a long ride trip. At about 3 a.m., the sun started to peek out. My sister was asleep in the passenger seat and my parents asleep in the back seat, so it was just me, on a straight stretch of highway in the middle of the desert. I was exhausted and extremely bored from the lack of scenery when suddenly, directly in front of me, up in the pale sky, there was a flash of green and a green meteor carved towards the horizon before flashing green again and disappeared. At first I thought it was a UFO or something, but I later read meteors can burn green if they have copper in them. Now I think fondly back on that meteor, my family was asleep for it, no one around for miles. I like to think that it was just for me. When I was doing the long-haul thing, I was driving through Oklahoma, don't remember exactly where, but it was late at night, and I was already tired. Well, I was driving along and saw what I thought was a grim reaper, looked in my mirrors and didn't see it. At that point I decided that, regardless of how many hours I have left on my log, I'm stopping the next chance I get to rest. Later that night after getting parked, I turned on my cab and heard someone talking about a bad accident just a few miles beyond where I had stopped. After asking how long ago it happened, it turned out that if I had kept going, would have been caught up in it. Edit, I do recall that I was heading north from Dallas, Texas. Looking at my old book that I kept of tracks I took, I think it was US 75N, since Plano was on the list of cities I would go through on that run. Where exactly I couldn't tell you. One time I was driving home late at night. I was on a pretty major street lined with shops with large parking lots. So, I had a fairly pleasant view of things around me. Being late at night, there were maybe just a couple of cars parked, probably belonging to late-night cleaners and whatnot. So, I'm driving, and out of nowhere a baseball comes flying out of thin air and slams into my windshield. As I said, I had a fairly pleasant view of the parking lots and there was nobody around except for parked cars. And even those were exceedingly rare. I panicked and pulled off to the side of the road for a minute before driving off. I continued to look around and I drove, but I couldn't find any sign of life. To this day I have no idea where the rogue baseball came from. A friend of my cousin was a long-haul trucker. He was making a delivery across the country and was in a hardly used dirt stretch of a rural route. Since the road wasn't exactly peachy, he had to drive slowly. He sees another truck slowly approaching from the opposite direction, and he sees the truck is the same as his. Since this isn't fairly uncommon, he didn't think much of it, but as the other one grew closer he decided to honk in recognition of having the same kind of truck. The other one replies, and all is good. That is, until they narrowly and very slowly had to pass one another. He turned to look at the driver and he saw himself. Not a reflection, not a similar person, but his exact same copy, same clothes, same hat, same red beard, staring at him. They passed each other and that was that. He told me he'd seen very weird things, but that was the moment he decided to stop being a trucker. When I was a kid I grew up in the cab of my father's truck. He was a single father, and I was on the road with him quite a bit. Occasionally, if he were going to pass near my grandmother's house, he would drop me off there for a week or so, I'm sure to give him a break from an incredibly young son in a very tight space. One time when he was nearing my grandmother's house I remember crying because I didn't want him to drop me off. I loved my grandmother very much, but I was attached to my father for some reason. Separation anxiety, I'm sure, thanks Mom. As I was sobbing I started recognizing my surroundings and knew we were close. I decided the next song on the radio was going to be Dad's song, so every time I heard it I would think of him. I guess that's why they call it The Blues, by Elton John came on the radio, so that chipper tune became the song I used to remember him. That was in the early 80s, and I can't remember hearing that song over the last 20+ years. 3 years ago, I was driving to see my dad in the hospital and I stopped at a truck stop for gas and snacks. What song should start playing over the truck stop speakers, but I guess that's why they call it The Blues. I got a sick, nervous feeling. Was this a good omen or bad one? I'm not superstitious, so I tried to dismiss it and chalked it up to chance. April 11th will be 3 years since I lost him. Surely it was just a random occurrence that I would hear that song going to see him for the last time, right? I'm not superstitious or religious, but I sure would like to see the old man again someday. This actually happened the other day on a random country road in Tennessee. Pitch black darkness and the only thing around were fields, hills, and me, didn't see any houses. Anyway, I was getting really tired since the day before this I flew from Washington to Atlanta. I was driving from Atlanta to northern Indiana and out of nowhere I saw a dog in the grass, and normally this is fine, but its eyes weren't glowing from my headlights, which for some reason really made me feel unsettled. Next thing I know, it charged for the tire of my trailer, snarling and barking. Thank God I didn't hit it, and I looked back, and it was gone. As bad as it sounds, even if I did hit it I probably wouldn't have stopped because I was in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. I've heard stories of people finding some way to get people to stop in their commute in the middle of nowhere just to rob and or kill/hurt the driver. It was midnight and I wasn't taking the chance. My stepdad is a truck driver, and I asked him this question and he gave me 3 answers. In Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a guy was masturbating while driving by his truck and my stepdad threw his water bottle at him. Another time he said he was up near Oregon, and he was the only one on the freeway at the time since it was around 2 a.m. and something large and pale swooped down a few yards in front of his truck and swooped back up into the tree line. While driving at 70 miles per hour, a tire rolled ahead of him and went across the median, nearly hitting another car. I'm not a long-haul trucker, but I drove a moving truck across Nebraska. There's a point where you're going freeway speed, but the scenery doesn't change. It's a very strange sensation and it seemed to last far too long. I started to freak out at one point because I had the thought that I've always been driving through Nebraska, and I always will be. Everything else that has happened in my life must have been a hallucination, as there's nothing but Nebraska on the horizon. Nebraska is the truth. Nebraska is life. A friend of mine was driving overnight through Arizona on a basically abandoned road and his truck started having electrical issues, lights cutting on and off, no CB, etc. After about 5 minutes of that, a convoy of law enforcement/federal emergency vehicles passed him. In the middle of the emergency vehicles there was a flatbed semi with a massive saucer-shaped item chained to the bed and covered with tarps. About 5 minutes after passing the convoy, his radio and truck electrics came back up. He still recounts it as the craziest thing he's ever experienced on the road. My grandfather told me the story about how he was driving west to east along an empty stretch of road in southern South Dakota. He stopped at a stop sign at an intersection with nothing in sight, no buildings and no other vehicles. Then there was a bright light that hit him. He looked up and saw a bunch of blinking lights. Next thing he knew, he was at the counter of a diner about an hour down the road. It was about 6 hours later, and he had no idea what had happened. He asked the person at the diner when he came in, and the guy told him he came in about 10 minutes ago and just started drinking coffee without talking much. My grandpa told him what had happened, and the guy said something like, "Yep, that happens around here sometimes." Nothing weird ever happened to him again. He avoided that area for the rest of his life. He said he doesn't believe in aliens and doesn't know what happened, but I had a suspicion he thought he had been abducted and just never accepted it. He told me never to tell this story to other people, but he died years ago and most of the people who knew him are dead, so I figured it was okay. This isn't that interesting of a story, but it spooked me and my friend pretty bad at the time. The lake where I usually hang out had pulled a body out a few years ago. There are crosses off the road and near the lake with its name on it. I googled it and he died under mysterious circumstances. His death was ultimately ruled a suicide, but there are many questions that are left unanswered. One night, a friend and I drove to the lake at midnight and parked the car in the vicinity of the crosses. When it was time to leave, my car went haywire. The doors were unlocking and locking rapidly, and my headlights were turning on and off. I panicked and asked my friend, "Spencer, that's not you, are it?" And he responded with, "I thought it was you." All this was happening before I had even turned my car on. After a minute, we got the car on and sped off. Never talk about it again. I was at a truck stop in Arizona. I was pulling through the fuel island and right as I was about to leave, roughly 15 police cars came flying into the parking lot with a SWAT van. They surrounded a truck that was already parked for the night. I heard later that the driver had lost a tire or something off his trailer and it had killed a guy on the side of the road. I don't know how true that story was, but it sounded like possible. At the old Flying J in El Paso, I had pulled through the fuel island and was filling out logs and whatnot after filling up when someone started screaming for help on the CB. It's not unusual to hear kids moving around or whatever, but this sounded like a full-grown man and didn't sound fake. It only happens for about 15 to 20 seconds and then silence. Some people started asking the guy where he was but never got a response. Suddenly another big rack in the parking lot starts to take off right as a couple of police cars pull into the truck parking area. The big rig takes out a smaller sign and then jumps a curb out into the service road for I-10. Turns out a student got angry at his instructor and stabbed him before leading the police officers on a short high-speed chase. I have an uncle that was a truck driver in his youth, and he told all sort of stories about the things he encountered while on the roads of Brazil's countryside. He said that there was a road, in the north, maybe northwestern, part of the country that the truckers always said to avoid. Once, he had a scheduled delivery and he was late, so he said to himself, "Hate that," and took the aforementioned road, because it looked like it would be a good shortcut. At some point in the night, while driving, his truck simply stopped working. Dead. Like the battery died or something. After 5 minutes in complete darkness, he saw lights in the sky, slowly passing over his truck. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. So, he just sat there, scared, watching the lights go by. The lights eventually went away and after something like 20 or 30 minutes, his truck started working again and he followed his way.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.